the question is, can I use a Z code as a primary or first listed diagnosis? And I'm struggling with coding Aftercare especially. So the answer is yes, you can use a Z code for a first listed diagnosis. Well, the thing to understand, and this second question that came in, was that they were getting confused going from ICD-9 to ICD-10, and that not all the codes translate. And so the thing to remember is that ICD-9 doesn't translate into ICD-10 perfectly, not always. But one code that is fun to remember is the Z00.00 code, which I like to fondly refer to as the ZOO code, and that is for an encounter for general adult medical exam, and it's without abnormal findings, okay? Or you can use this for an encounter for adult health checkup when it's not otherwise specified. But remember, when you have this code, the ZOO code, that it is for no abnormal findings when they come in, right? That's the key there. And then there is an additional code that isn't ZOO, there after the point. You're going to have other characters for abnormal findings. So that wasn't the intent when they came in, this particular encounter code, but they do find something. So if you want to look at this in your manuals, in your ICD-10 manuals, if any of you have them with you, I'm sure you all carry them around with you wherever you go, right? The guidelines for this particular code is section 1C 21 C13. So looking at 13, right, it says routine and administrative examinations. Now, this is a lot of information, and so I actually made it in a smaller font because we really don't have to go over all of it. You can go over it in your own leisure here now that you know where it's at. But what it is expressing is that it's for a general checkup. All right, and this could be for an administrative purpose or maybe even for pre-employment physical. All right, so when you go in for a pre-employment physical, they don't expect to find that you have diabetes or hypertension. So it would be without any abnormal findings, or if they go in and they say, hey, you've got hypertension, then you know, that would be with abnormal findings. But this is a code that you are going to use if that happens in such cases where a diagnosis is found during a routine exam. What you should do is use the diagnosis, or if the condition is discovered, it should be coded in addition to this Z code. All right, now that's the basis of how this particular Z code works, and it's a common first listed diagnosis code. All right, so now as we scroll down, let's look at how this is found also for encounters for general medical examinations with abnormal findings. So the difference here is that the last character is not going to be an O or 0. It is going to be different, and there's options. And that's why you'll see a little hyphen there stating there's options. If you have an abnormal finding, just remember that this ZOO code is with abnormal findings and without abnormal findings. If you have abnormal findings, what should you do? Well, it says right here in this guideline, should a general medical exam result in an abnormal finding, the code for general medical examination with abnormal findings should be assigned, okay, just like we did before, as the first listed diagnosis. A secondary code for the abnormal finding should also be coded. Okay, so you come in for your pre-employment exam and they say, hey, you've got hypertension, and then you will have with abnormal findings and hypertension. Okay, so that is what could happen with this common Z code. So as we move along, what other Z codes can be used, right? There's actually quite a few. Now, don't don't forget, this is where the guidelines are, but let's look at this particular guideline that we looked at before, but look at 16. Okay, so as you're looking at your guidelines, it keeps indenting and an outline. 16 states a Z code that may only be principal or first listed diagnosis. What's the guidelines there? And so what I did was I actually went into Find a Code, and I took all of the Z codes down to the smallest level before the decimal, and gave you a list of what the possible options are of codes that could be principal or first listed. Right now, I don't know, I'm assuming most encoders do this for you, but Find a Code does. So I'm not going to read all of those because actually there's more than a dozen. But the main one, the one that always pops into my head, is the zoo code, Z00. And then as you look at some of these, the Z01 is for a special examination for without complaint, suspected or reported diagnosis. Administrative examination is 0.02. As we scroll down, let's jump and look at some of these others here. Let's see, we've got, now this would make sense. Look, we've got Z31.84 is encounter for fertility preservation procedure. Below that, we've got supervision of normal pregnancy, right? Because when you're in a pregnancy, you start out coming in every month, and then you come in every 2 weeks, and then it becomes weekly. And what code is the principal diagnosis for that? Well, it's a Z34. It's your encounter is supervision of this normal pregnancy. And then it goes on for postpartum care as well. Let's see, they've got plastic and reconstructive surgery. These are things that are going to take multiple visits. However, you're coming in mainly for the same thing, unless you have a complication that is involved. And I think there's even more if we scroll down a little bit. Let's see, one of the ones that I forget that exists is Z52, donors of organs and tissue. And this always made me think of a friend of mine. Her brother has had multiple kidney transplants, and siblings were not always a good match. And now, as we've advanced with that, my friend, his sister, is going to be a match, and so she's prepping to be a donor for him. And so ultimately, this Z5 code would fall into that. Then we get down to the last one, Z99.12, encounter for respiratory or ventilator dependence during power failure. So they've got everything, right? Anything that you can think of could possibly be in there. And again, I found these off of Find a Code when I looked up the Z codes, and then you're able to go back and look at a list of them in order. So it was mentioned in the question about aftercare. So I want to highlight that quickly. So if you've got the categories Z00 through Z99, and these codes, why do we have them? Well, they're for occasions when circumstances other than a disease, injury, or external cause classifiable to the categories of A00 through Y89, okay, that's that huge range, are recorded as diagnosis or problems. Right, and this is going to be stated, at least in Find a Code, on every Z code. This is going to be a statement. But two main ways this arises, and when you're looking at these Z codes. And the first one, it's when a person may or may not be sick when they come in. Thus, when you have a person that's coming in because they're pregnant and they're getting their routine care, they're not sick, and yet it's routine care for this pregnancy. See how that works? Okay, and Then it goes on to explain more about the donor tissue and some other things like prophylactic vaccinations, immunizations, if you bring your child in to be vaccinated, or maybe you're going in to have a flu shot and now they have a pneumonia shot, right? Then that would fall under that category. And then the second part of that would be when some circumstances or problem is present which influences the person's health, but is not in itself currently an illness or injury. And again, that's the pregnancy that is in there. Again, this is straight out of the guidelines, and in that's all listed in Find a Code. I believe that's about it. If we scroll down to the bottom, I don't know if I put an example. Nope, that's it. So again, when you get your transcript, those links on Find a Code are there. Find a Code has a free version, which you should be able to pull those up. But Z codes, honestly, if you're coming in for follow-up, then you know, it mostly depends on why you're doing the follow-up. If there is a diagnosis, if they've, you know, fractured their hip and they're coming in for follow-up of that in a skilled facility, right? It's follow-up for the fractured care. And then you're looking at a diagnosis code other than a Z code, right? And so don't forget that you've got these Z codes available to you. They can be first listed if they fall in that list. However, if there is a diagnosis that is the reason they're being treated, of course, that's going to go as the first listed diagnosis. Z codes are a lot of fun, guys.